Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please stand for the presentation of our national colors? And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage Miss Octavia Connolly for the singing of our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for a moment of silence in honor of our ancestors. Thank you. You may be seated. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Master of Ceremony, David Williams.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Let us give a round of applause to the Joint Service Color Guard, a unit that I served with back in a few years ago when I was active duty, as well as a round of applause for Ms. Octavia Connolly, OSM RE's own. Thank you very much. Uh, and now, to you, the DOI family and friends in the audience who took the time this morning and left your work enclaves to join us, and to you, our larger DOI family, who joined us from around the country via live stream connection, we welcome you to the beautiful Sidney Yates Auditorium located here at 1849 C Street Northwest in historical Washington, D.C. And on behalf of the Office of Surface Mining and Reclamation and Enforcement, OSMRE, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BESE, and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, who is in partnership with all of us, we extend a very warm and hearty good morning, Department of the Interior. My name is David Williams, and it is my esteemed honor to serve as your master ceremonial this morning. Again, we thank each of you for taking time away from your very busy schedule to join us as we celebrate and commemorate Black History Month 2020. We believe we've planned a great program for you this morning, one that we hope you will engage, become educated, as well as leave empowered. This year's Black National Month, this year's Black History Month national theme is African Americans and the Vote, a very significant and important theme to us all. While each February we recognize the achievements of African Americans in this country and the central vital role we've played and continue to play in shaping our nation's history, this year is no different. In fact, today, we're still fighting not only for racial and economic justice, but for a fundamental right that's so essential and central to democracy itself, access to the ballot box. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our opening remarks, it is my honor to introduce OSMRE's Director, Mr. Lanny Erdos, as well as he will be followed by Ms. Erica Dunston-White, our new new Director for Civil Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lanny Erdos.
Thank you, David. I don't know how I can follow Octavia. I didn't realize that you could sing that well. Great job. Great way to start the program. Good morning, and welcome to this year's Black History Month program. My name is Lanny Erdos. As David said, I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Surface Mining. I want to provide a special welcome to all those that will participate in today's program. I'm looking forward to seeing the performances and learning more about the roles African Americans have played throughout history. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would also like to thank any senior members of the department's leadership team who have taken time from their busy schedules to be here today. And also, I want to acknowledge all the men and women who are here today, who are currently serving, who have served in the armed forces. Welcome and thank you for your service and for keeping us safe and ensuring our individual freedoms and rights. None more important than the right to vote. Each year, during the month of February, our country takes time to reflect on and to celebrate the many contributions that African Americans have made to the success of our great nation. This year's national theme for Black History Month, African Americans in the Vote, recognizes the struggles for voting rights for both Black men and women throughout American history, and focuses on the countless African Americans past and present who have suffered and made the ultimate sacrifice to secure the right to vote. The impact of their selfless service helped to shape American history, dating back to the Civil War and before. The year 2020 marks the 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment, which gave the right to Black men to vote following the Civil War. Even before the Civil War, free Black men petitioned state legislatures for the right to vote. But it wasn't until the year 1870 that the 15th Amendment provided that the right to vote should not be denied or abridged on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. 2020 Also marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. As I sought to further educate myself on the theme for this year's commemoration, I learned that that theme is filled with paradoxes of suffrage and sacrifice, valor and defeat, of opportunities and setbacks, of artistic creativity and repression, and loss of life, families, and the hope for peace. This year's theme, African Americans in the Vote, provides a framework for many stories, such as Mr. Frederick Douglass and the Ladies of Freed. Their many diverse stories reveal the positive impact of voting, not only during their era, but on the larger African American community today. I'm looking forward to hearing from Mr. Douglass and later having an opportunity to talk with our very distinguished and honored guest. In closing, I want to thank the Office of Equal Opportunity, and I appreciate the efforts of our host in planning and coordinating today's event. Again, welcome and enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, that's better. My name is Erica White Dunstan. I am the new director of the Office of Civil Rights here at the Department of the Interior. I would like to first thank all of our esteemed guests here today, as well as all of our senior leadership, and for the amazing job that OSMRE has done in putting together this program. The African American History Month theme for 2020 is African Americans and the Vote. There is one word that is called to mind when we think of this theme. It is remembrance. First, this year marks the sesquicentennial of the 15th Amendment, passed in 1870. This amendment actually reads, "The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." Second, despite the enactment of the 15th Amendment, poll taxes, literacy tests, fraud, and intimidation still limited the right to vote for African Americans in this country. Third, it took marches and national protests to eventually create the 24th Amendment, prohibiting poll taxes, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to enforce the right to vote for African Americans. But most significantly, the opportunity to vote symbolized for many the acknowledgement of personhood for African Americans. Can you remember the first time that you voted? I certainly do. I remember the excitement of going to the polls to make my voice heard. I remember being excited to get the little stamp on the side that said I voted. I also remember standing in the long lines and trying to figure out how to line up the little dots to vote because I knew that this mattered. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven rings with the harmonies of liberty. As we enjoy today's program, let us not forget the many battles fought, the lives lost to support African American suffrage. Let us never forget the price.
Well, thank you, Erica. Beautiful voice. We didn't know you had that. And thank you, Thank you, Lanny, for your wonderful words of inspiration, and we really appreciate that. Karima Wambui is singer, songwriter, poet, and actress. Born and raised in upstate New York, her career started, I beg your pardon, as a model and dancer. She has since trained at the Performing Arts Theater and the Studio Theater in Washington, D.C. Acting credits include The Color Purple and For Color Girls, just to name a few. Karima has been writing poetry since 1998 and is often asked to write poetry for special occasions, such as this. You can contact her at the email that's listed in your program. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present to you Ms. Karima Wambui.
Thank you. How y'all doing today? So this poem is called Truly Gifted, and it's so we will always remember, no matter what happens, those who came before us and paid the price, and sometimes people who try to make us forget that we're not gifted. We all are. We must never forget we are truly gifted. I dare you say it. I'm truly gifted. Hand wrapped with gold satin paper, gold glitter bows, you glow. Inside then out into a world of illusions. Contusions line the walls of your head, but you're fed from the dead. Your ancestors cheer you on, making sure you don't quit, making sure you know that red octagon stop sign. Well, that's for cause and not your heart. You cannot stop. You will not stop. Gifteds only go and go faster, better. Moving through tumultuous weather, you laugh at thunderstorms and smile at rain. From your pain came your gain. You gifted child of the sun. You gifted child of the sun. You gifted child of the sun. I dare you say it. I dare you say you're the one to bring us victory from defeat. Like the sweet feet that walked away from plantations when a nation realized you were more than 3/5 human. Oh, King of kings, Queen of queens, you reign. Truly gifted, painted on your crowns. Your frowns jump upside down in haste. 8 hours of labor pain from your mother's womb was never a waste of time. You shine. Waited for this moment your whole life, so I dare you say it. I'm truly gifted. I dare you say it. I'm truly proud. I dare you say it. I dare you say it out loud. I'm truly gifted. Say it with me. 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 I'm truly gifted. I'm truly proud. I dare you say it like my man James Brown. I'm black and I'm proud. You truly gifted child. Thank you.
Can we say it again? Truly gifted. Thank you, Ms. Karima. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you some special guests we have here today. Several years ago, the female reenactors of distinction, formerly called FREED, formed as an educational auxiliary organization within the African American Civil War Museum, located at 10,000, or I beg your pardon, 1000 on the historic U Street corridor, Northwest Washington, D.C. Their mission: to share the courageous accomplishments of the United States Colored Troops, is achieved through portrayals of women who made significant contributions toward the fight for freedom during the Civil War era. The freed ladies accept numerous invitations to perform at schools, libraries, churches, historical events such as Black History Month, and conferences locally as well as in other states, without seeking compensation for their appearances. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the African American Civil War Museum and Memorial, I proudly introduce and present the beautiful, gifted, and talented female reenactors of distinction.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. In 1866, I was invited to do a presentation at the National Women's Conference in New York. Also speaking at that conference, we had Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott. You could say this was my entree into the women's suffragette movement. I was well prepared. As I made my way to New York for this conference, I knew that all the suffragettes were not going to warmly welcome me. I knew that all the suffragettes would not agree with everything I had to say. But I felt very strongly that the colored women and the white women needed to work together. At the same time that we needed to work together, I also knew that the priorities in the colored community were not the priorities of the suffragette movement. So I felt that the colored women had to come together to form their own organization to fight for their own priorities. And to that end, I was a founding member of the National Association of Colored Women. In conclusion, I fought with the suffragettes and the colored women to improve the lot of all Americans, regardless of race, class, and gender. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Frances Ann Rollin of Charleston, South Carolina. I was born to a free family of color before the war. After the Civil War, and with the help of Major Martin R. Delaney, who was a provost marshal of the U.S. colored troops, I filed a civil suit as a result of being denied first-class passage on a riverboat. This suit was an early test of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and it played a role in the adoption of the Equal Rights Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. I later moved to Washington, D.C., and worked in the office of Frederick Douglass, who was at that time Recorder of Deeds. I quoted Frederick Douglass in the biography that I wrote of Major Delaney, which happened to be the first biography published by a person of African descent. I quote, "Next to his pride of birth, and almost inseparable from it, is his pride of race, which even distinguishes him from the noted colored men of the present time. This finds an apt illustration in a remark made by the distinguished Frederick Douglass. Said he, 'I thank God for making me a man simply, but Delaney always thanks him for making him a black man.'" Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Eleanor Elrich. I was born in 1785, a businesswoman amid oppression. My father and his two brothers were forced to come to America on a slave ship and promised if they would fight in the Revolutionary War, they would be free, and they would be given 200 acres of land in New York. Now, we were in Warwick, Rhode Island. My father never got the land, the 200 acres of land, because he was given minimum to get there. But my father did gain his freedom. I am the youngest of 7 girls, and I had 2 brothers. I started my first job making 25 cents a week, cleaning. And from that job, when my parents died, I was 19. And my brothers had moved away. But we got together and started a business, making cheese, sewing, boiling soap, and I even wrote my book, Memoirs of Eleanor. Thank you.
My name is Charlotte Scott. When I gained my freedom, I chose to keep the first name Charlotte and took on the last name Scott. I was born 1803, 1805 on a plantation owned by Captain William Scott and his wife Anne, and they had over 1,000 acres of land in Virginia, the area called Lynchburg. They owned my mother, so that meant that I was born to slavery. When I had my freedom, I said, when I heard that Mr. Lincoln had been assassinated, I said, we need to do something to raise his memory up, and that's how I want to be remembered. Because I lived a life as a slave woman, as many do, but that's how I want to be remembered. So a statue was designed for him and installed in the area called Lincoln Park today, over behind Capitol Hill. And it's on East Capitol between 11th and 13th Street. And at the base of that monument, it has President Lincoln with his right hand over kneeling, holding the Emancipation Proclamation, and his left hand over a kneeling black man. And I think that he's looking up and rising up for a day of freedom. If you look at the base of that statue, there's a plaque, and it tells you all about why that statue is there. And there's just two names on there, Charlotte Scott and Abraham Lincoln. There was a big celebration on that day when it was installed on the 11th anniversary of Mr. Lincoln's assassination. And there was a big to-do. Black people from all over came over. And even Mr. Frederick Douglass was there. And he gave a rousing speech and talked for 30 minutes. But one of the things he did say was, it would have been more manly if the man had been standing, but that was okay. So I encourage you to go over there and take a look at that statue and reflect on the idea of freedom. And one thing I want you to know is that was the very first statue to Mr. Lincoln, even before the Lincoln Memorial. So that gives us his claim to fame. So thank you, and do come see the statue. And remember Charlotte Scott.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Harriet Ann Jacobs. I was born in the fall of 1813 in Edenton, North Carolina. I had two children, Louisa and Daniel. I didn't know I really was a slave as a little girl because my mistress was so kind and nice to me. She taught me to read, to write, and to sew. And later on, the reading and writing benefited me greatly because I wrote the first manuscript of a slave woman about the atrocities that were committed against enslaved women. And that book was called The Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. As I continued through my journey, I went to Rochester, New York, in search of my children that were sent there from the plantation. So I escaped and spent 10 long years through the trials of someone who was an escaped slave and reached Rochester, New York, where I ended up joining my children, Louisa, and ended up having the pleasure of having an 18-month residency in a building that we shared. My brother had a reading room, and in the building, Frederick Douglass had his office where he published the North Star. I eventually moved to Washington, D.C., and to Alexandria, Virginia, where I opened a school for freedmen and their children to teach them to read and write. And I died in 1897 in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
My name is Hattie. I don't know how old I am, and I've long since forgot the name given to me at my birth. But one thing I do remember is my mama's loving embrace and her face when she sent me to fetch water, and I never came back. My first master told us we were brought here to toil for the white man. My second master said that we were his property and we had no rights that a white man had to respect. I've lived a life of hardship and toil. But one thing I do recall is the color of my master's blood. It looked just like mine. And my Mrs. Monthly's looked like mine too. And I done nursed all of their children. So much so, I scarcely had any left for my own. Well, does that make me a woman? The only time I counts for anything is on the auction block and during the big count. But even then, I'm only 3/5 of a person. I ain't figured out yet how you reckon 3/5 of a person. I've birthed 10 children. And one by one, they've all been sold from me. My youngest was no more than 6 years old. And I can still feel him clutching after me, screaming and hollering for me to help him. Mama, Mama, please, Mama, don't let them take me away, Mama. The way I screamed and hollered for my mama when they took me away. Well, this morning when I woke up, I had my eyes stayed on freedom. And for the first time since coming to this land, I'm gonna choose my own name. And there won't be any more auction blocks for me. No more peck of corn for me. But most of all, no more driver's lash for me. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here with you today. My name is Hallie Quinn Brown. I was born in 1850. I didn't pass away until 1949. I was here a nice long time. And in that period, I did a lot. I'm a teacher, an author, a public speaker, known as an elocutionist, a club woman, community activist. My first love is to help children, and I hope you are helping our children today. They need your love. They need your guidance. I worked with Susan B. Anthony on women's issues. I also worked in the Republican Party to help people get in positions that could help to give us an opportunity to participate as citizens of character. I was a nominating voice at the 1924 Republican Convention to nominate Warren G. Harding as President of the United States. Mr. Douglas gave me a letter of introduction that caused me to meet Queen Victoria in helping to do various things for our colleges here in the country. I also represented the United States in women's issues on women's conferences. I had quite a life. As I come back today, since 1949, you have an awful lot. You look beautiful. You have great food. But your young people don't look that happy. And they're always looking down. Oh, you've got to help them. They need you. You know when they're doing right and when they're doing wrong. You mustn't be afraid to help them, lest they become captive and lose their freedom, following the wrong thing and the wrong ideals. Freedom is not only doing what I want to do, but what I ought to do. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to join these distinguished ladies this morning. My name is Charlotte Fortin Grimke, and my birth on August 17, 1837, marked the fourth generation of freeborn blacks in the Fortin family. My grandfather had attained financial security for our family as a successful entrepreneur. However, our wealth nor our social standing in the community afforded us equal access to this country's resources or equal protection under its laws. Therefore, my earliest memories of our family are everyone in the family being involved in the anti-slavery abolitionist activities. And that meant utilizing their resources, including their money, to ensure that political and economic opportunity was made available to all blacks. It was a lifetime of work, but they were committed to it, and I grew into that legacy. I'm historically remembered as a teacher and a writer. I taught the children of freed slaves, mostly in the South, but towards the end of my career, when I moved here in Washington, I also taught at the preparatory school, which is now known as Dunbar. My writings are poetry and essays, but I'm most well known for the journal that I started as a young woman when I just wanted to personally chronicle my life. I didn't have any idea that they would eventually be published or that people would even be interested in reading them. But I finished my life here in Washington, D.C. as the wife of Francis Grimke. Francis and his brother Archibald were born to a slave woman and her master. However, their father was fortunate to have two sisters who were staunch abolitionists and came to the North. They were responsible for supporting Francis and Archibald through college. And I'm pleased to say that Francis not only graduated from Lincoln University, but he also went on to graduate from Princeton University and became the pastor of the 15th Street Presbyterian Church right here in Washington. We continued to be involved throughout the rest of our lives in social injustice causes. And Frances had the honor of performing the marriage between the guest speaker today, Mr. Frederick Douglass, and his second wife, Helen Pitts.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, and I was born in Natchez, Mississippi around 1817. My parents were John and Mary, and we were slaves, and we belonged to Miss Elizabeth Greenfield. Now, when Miss Greenfield became a Quaker, she decided to pay the passage for all of her slaves, including my parents, to go to the new colony in Africa called Liberia. But she kept me with her, and she moved to Philadelphia. Now, in Philadelphia, initially I lived with a sister I found that lived in Philadelphia. But a few years later, I got a letter from Miss Greenfield requesting that I come and live with her, for by then she was aged and she needed some help. So I went to her home and I began to help her around the house. And to make my work go lighter and sometimes faster, I began to sing. And one day the neighbor, a Dr. Peters, heard me singing because back then when it was warm, we had to throw the windows up to get air to flow through the house. And he came and he offered to give me music lessons. And Miss Greenfield said, "That's fine." I was happy with that. And that opened up a whole new world for me. I got my music lessons, I had voice lessons, I learned to play the guitar, I learned to play the piano. And from that, I began to sing up and down the East Coast above the Mason-Dixon line at some of the finest social gatherings in the country. I also sang at some of the concert halls, and in fact, in New York, I remember one time, they threatened to burn the concert hall down because a woman of color was going to stand on the stage and sing. But fortunately, they had put police all around and nothing happened. At the same time I was singing, there was a young lady singing called Jenny Lind, and she was known as the Swedish Nightingale. Well, they decided I needed a nickname as well, so they named me the Black Swan. And so I had a 3-octave range. I would start off a song as a soprano, and I would end up as a baritone. And on several occasions, my femininity was questioned because it was said my baritone was clearer and stronger than many men they had heard sing. Well, during this time, I had been sending money to London because I was told I should go to Europe, travel around, get more music lessons. So when I arrived in London, guess what? The man I had been sending all my money to had left and had taken all my money with him. I was stranded in London until I heard Harriet Beecher Stowe was there, the lady who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. I approached her. She asked me to sing for her, and then she consented to help. She introduced me to the Duchess of Sutherland. Then the Duchess introduced me to Sir George Smart, who was Queen Victoria's personal organist. He helped me a lot. He gave me music lessons. He also helped me to travel through Italy and get even more voice lessons. And when I came back to England, I had to do a command performance for Queen Victoria. And she gave me a 20-pound gold piece, which allowed me to travel back to America. And one of my greatest moments when I returned was that I got to sing an opening song before the Honorable Mr. Frederick Douglass spoke at a lecture series in New York. I died around 1876, never married, never had any children, but I was not completely forgotten. A gentleman by the name of Mr. W.C. Handy started the first Black-owned recording company, and he named it the Black Swan. Before I take my seat, I'd like to sing a song for you, and it really expresses despair and almost disgust at the situation of being an enslaved person and wanting to be free. It's called Oh, Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. They'll be singing. They'll be singing. They'll be singing over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. They'll be moaning. They'll be moaning. They'll be moaning over me, and before I be a slave, oh, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Thank you.
The ladies are free, ladies and gentlemen, the ladies are free. Thank you very much, thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Michael Crutcher shares an important date with the man that he portrays. No one spoke about voting more than Mr. Douglas. Before there was a Martin Luther King Jr., before there was a Malcolm X, before there was a Marcus Garvey, there was Mr. Frederick Douglass. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frederick Douglass.
Without a struggle, there is no progress. I was born a slave, and my back bears the marks of the slave driver's lash. I was born on Maryland's eastern shore, but many years before I was born, my people were kidnapped in Africa. They were stripped of all dignity. They were thrown in chains. Among them were women and children, were chiefs and warriors. They were herded aboard smelly slave ships and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, the Middle Passage, where today millions of the bones lie on the ocean floor. They were brought to this land, America, where they were enslaved. They were forced to work without compensation. People often ask me, Mr. Douglas, you were a slave. What was the worst thing that happened to you as a slave? And I always tell them the same thing. When I was an infant, a tiny baby, I was snatched out of my mama's arms and my mama was sold. I lived with her mother, grandmother Betsy, and I recall seeing my mama only 3 or 4 times in my life. Slavery was wrong. I endured slavery for 20 years, but during that time, I learned to read and write. I educated myself, and that was my way out of slavery. I wrote a book, the narrative of my life as a slave. In that book, I named Grandmama Betsy. I named my mama Harriet. They sent me to England. I was in England, Scotland, and Ireland for 18 months. During that time, I spoke about the horrors of slavery in America. They begged me to stay, but I said, no, I have to go back because there are 4 million slaves in America. And I will not rest until they are all free as I am. There were other people fighting for slavery. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, John Brown. I was beginning to question those who professed to favor freedom, yet deprecated agitation. There were those who wanted crops without plowing up the ground. They wanted rain without thunder and lightning. They wanted the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. I knew the struggle might be a moral one, it might be physical, might be both moral and physical, but I knew there had to be a struggle. For power conceded to nothing without a demand. It never had and it never would. We had to demand our freedom. And when that first cannonball shattered the walls of Fort Sumter, I said then and there the war would not be fought entirely by white men. for a war undertaken and brazenly carried out for the perpetual enslavement of black men, logically and loudly called for colored men to help suppress it. He came. He was born a dirt poor farm boy in Kentucky. He was a lawyer in one state. He said slavery was wrong and that it was a moral issue. His name was Abraham Lincoln. Eventually, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. I was in Boston. There were two massed assemblies, Tremont Temple and Music Hall. As my great friend spoke, a visitor was kept at the door. We were waiting for the signing. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, still no word, but George Thomas Russell went to the telegraph and came back with a document in his hand. All people held as slaves in said states, henceforth, now, and forever, shall be free. I wasn't pleased with that document. It could have gone further and said more than it did, but what it did, it opened the Union forces to African Americans. Now my brave black men could fight for their own freedom. I'd long see it. Once let the black man get upon his person, the brass letters U.S., let him get an eagle on his button, musket on his shoulder, and bullets in his pocket. And there will be no power on earth that can deny he's earned the right to citizenship in the United States of America. They made me a recruiter for these men. And I bellowed to them, the trumpet has sounded. Men of color to arms, this is your golden opportunity. And they came. Through the fields and through the woods, over hills and over mountains. They came because they were tired of the women being abused. And they were tired of little children being snatched out of their mother's arms. They came, they enlisted, and they fought gallantly. But I lived in New Bedford. I lived in Lynn, Massachusetts. And I lived in Rochester, New York. It was there I met Susan B. Anthony. I met Elizabeth Cady Stanton and many other great women. I was invited to the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, and there I had a taste of suffrage and the elected franchise. I was invited to that meeting, and it was a 2-day event. On the first day, all of those great women spoke. On the second day, the Declaration of Sentiment was read, and a ballot was taken. And I was the first man to stand up in favor of women's rights. The war ended. The North was victorious, and the South, with all of its great generals, was defeated. And we should never take for granted the freedom we have today, or the price that was paid for that freedom. Thousands of men died. 40,000 of my brave black men died. And my friend Abraham Lincoln had died. He was not always my friend. I disagreed with him on many things, but eventually, he was my friend. Abraham Lincoln was preeminently the white man's president. The Union meant more to him than did our freedom or our liberty. But if it were not for his beneficent rule, my people would not have been lifted from the depths of slavery to the heights of liberty and manhood. Had the curtain of death come down upon him but slowly, had he lived to see the end of his great works, we still would have mourned him greatly. But taken away the way he was, by surprise, killed, assassinated, not because he was hated, because if anybody knew that man the way I knew him, they could never hate him. He was killed, not only what he did for my people, but what he did as an example to freedom and liberty throughout the world. The war ended. A war that had filled our land with widows and orphans, made stumps of men in the very flower of their youth, built up a debt heavier than a mountain of gold. I ask, if this war is to be forgotten, I ask, what in the name of everything holy shall man remember? We should never forget those men who fought, many of them who died. We should never forget that our nation is no longer cursed by the hell-black system of human bondage. We must never forget that the Star-Spangled Banner floats only over free American citizens in every quarter of this land. Our brave black men fought. They fought to become full citizens in this country. But they were not given full citizenship. They were not given the elective franchise. The right to vote. I fought for it. Reconstruction came. The 15th Amendment came. And all of a sudden, we had a black senator and black congressmen in the South. But that didn't last long. You see, Andrew Johnson reversed many things that had been done. He was no friend of the black man. And then Jim Crow laws came, and I'm told that the black men's right to vote dwindled and dwindled and soon went away. And it was not, I'm told, until many years later that it was regained. Now, women were still fighting for the right to vote. In fact, Elizabeth Stanton and the suffragists became annoyed with me because I kind of got off their bandwagon and supported the men and their right to vote. But soon we reconciled, and it was not until I see many years later that things got better. But people, we still need to vote. Had I been living today, and had I seen how the elective franchise is not being taken advantage of, if I could grab you by the neck and drag you out to the polls, I would. But you should take it upon yourself to vote. Many people suffered and died for that right. And it should never be taken for granted. I'm asked, what does a black man want? He wants it. He wants the right to vote. Why? Because he has the right to vote. And people were declaring that black men were unfit for the elective franchise. But that's not true. He is well fit. And he must vote. Because your slave owners of yesteryear will become your politicians of today. Thank God that slavery, the hell black system of bondage, is no longer with us. I'm often asked to remember with equal admiration those who fought to destroy our country and those who fought to save it. I'm no minister of malice, and I would not strike the fallen. But may my right hand forget its cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I ever know the difference in that terrible, protracted conflict. I have much more I could tell you, but I think I've spoken enough. The old man is tired. I've traveled great distance in time to be with you. I thank you very much.
Mr. Frederick Douglass, the spirit of Frederick Douglass, ladies and gentlemen, the spirit of Frederick Douglass. Thank you, Mr. Douglass, for those inspiring words that still stands true today. We're almost at the end of our program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for enduring us thus far. I now welcome to the stage Ms. Karima Wambui.
Thank you, Mr. Douglass. How y'all doing out there? Y'all still up? I'd like to thank David and Renee for inviting me to this program. I'm gonna read a piece of Maya Angelou's Still I Rise before I go into my song. You know, I was recently in a performance for Maya Angelou, and while we were at the Thurgood Marshall Center, we were leaving, and the guy said, Harriet Tubman's great niece is in the other room, you should go meet her. And I was like, for real? So I went in there, and they started talking about voting, and you know, the whole 3/5 human thing. They were saying for every 3 Black people, that counted as 1 vote back in the day. And I just want that to sink in. For 3 of y'all, we weren't good enough to be counted as 1 vote for 1 person. It was every 3 people was counted as 1 vote. So I think about those times, and this Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, I'm sure she penned this poem thinking about everything that was happening back then. I don't always understand it. I still don't understand it, but it happened. We survived it. We're here, and I hope we can get past it and makes us stronger and not weakened. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may tread me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you so beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room? Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Well, you may shoot me with your words, and you may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise. Out of the huts of the history's shame, I'll rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I'll rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind all those nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am, and every Black person in here is the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we're gonna walk this out and move all these mountains. We're gonna walk this out and move these mountains. And I'll rise up high like the day. I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up. Yes, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. I'll rise up high like the waves. I'll rise up. In spite of the aches, I'll rise up. Yes, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. And when the silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe, and I know you feel like dying, but I promise you we'll bring the world to its feet and move all these mountains. We'll bring the world to its feet and move all these mountains. See, all we need is hope. And for that we have each other. Turn to your neighbor and say, and for that we have each other. And for that we have each other. We will rise, yes, we will rise. Oh, yes, we will. I'll rise up, high like the day. I'll rise up, in spite of the aches. And I'll do it 1,000 times again. I'm gonna sing this little song that I think our ancestors sung. Spirituals kept us strong. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. We need you, Lord, to come by here. We need you, Lord, to come by here. We need you, Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. 'Cause somebody's crying, Lord, come by here. Somebody's crying, Lord, come by here. And somebody's praying, Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. I want y'all to go by the voting polls, all right? Peace and blessings.
Thank you, Karima. Can we give her another round of applause, please? Still, we rise. Still, we rise. Still, we rise. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I want to thank you all for coming here today. We're almost at the end of our program. We'd be remiss if we didn't invite our own Deputy Director for OSMRE, Ms. Glenda H. Owens. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thanks to all of you for being here this morning for this important commemoration of Black History Month 2020, recognizing, promoting, and celebrating the national theme, African Americans and the Vote. In addition to those of you who are here with us physically, I also want to thank those who are joining us via live streaming and hope that you have gotten just a portion of this wonderful program through the live streaming that we've experienced here this morning in Yates Auditorium. I especially want to thank our equal opportunity offices from OSMRE, Bessie, and Bohm. Thank you for pulling together what has just been a wonderful and educational and enlightening program. I am feeling very much inspired by all that I've heard here this morning, and I hope that you all are as well. Special thanks to the ladies of Freed. Thank you for taking us back through that historical trip. It was very enlightening and inspiring. And thank you, Karima Wambuli. Thank you for your words. And that Andrew Day song is one of my favorites. Thank you for doing that. And Michael Kutcher, Mr. Frederick Douglass, thank you for transporting us back to the eloquent presence of Frederick Douglass. Let's give them all another round of applause and appreciation. As supervisors and managers and employees in the federal government, it is our responsibility to foster an atmosphere that eliminates barriers to employment opportunities and advancement of opportunities, to create policies and strategies aimed specifically at eliminating injustices and inequality, to expand employment and advancement opportunities and inclusion for all. As an African American woman, I know, I recognize, and I appreciate the importance and criticality of inclusion. As we've heard today, the year 2020 marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment and the culmination of the women's suffrage movement, as well as marking the sesquicentennial, that's 150 years, of the 15th Amendment of the right of Black men to vote. Despite the many seemingly insurmountable obstacles, African Americans made their voices heard on the importance of the vote. The achievement of full voting rights and a political process encouraging participation by all Americans became an essential goal for African Americans who battled against Jim Crow laws, segregation, and injustice. Highlighting that right and responsibility to vote cannot be taken lightly or minimized. Again, thank you for joining us this morning and for this very special program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenda. Thank you. Thank you very much for your closing comments and the wonderful remarks. It's been a pleasure serving as your master of ceremony this morning. The ladies are free. Mr. Douglass, thank you all for coming. And you, beautiful DOI, out here in the audience as well as watching our live stream from around the country. Now that we're at the end of the program, we're going to close it out, and we're going to invite the ladies of Freed back up to the front of the stage, as well as Mr. Douglass and Ms. Karima, as she leads us as in one stanza of the Black National Anthem. As you depart the auditorium, I invite you to join us in the bistro. There are reserved seating for our featured guests. We have a cultural lunch prepared for you, as well as cultural vendors in the bistro. We invite you to attend and participate. Feel free to have a conversation with these beautiful people as we break bread together. So, if you all would join us, please stand as we close out our program. One stanza of the National Anthem is included in your program, and we thank you for joining us today for Black History Month 2020. Karima?
Every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high.
Thank you. Black History Month 2020. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, beautiful ladies of Free, Mr. Frederick Douglass, Ms. Karima. We welcome you to join us in the bistro. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you all.